What price a parent's love a Scottish family seeking a quiet life rents? Brentwood House, a grand Georgian mansion standing in wooded grounds beside a ruined house in a deep glen, only to find themselves in a terrifying ordeal. As their son plunges further into despair, can they as a family keep a hold of reality? Is there a happy solution? The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant was originally published in 1881 as part of the collection Stories of the Seen and Unseen. Join me, Tony Walker, narrator of the Classic Ghost Stories podcast, for this week's story. Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back. Isn't that so? You try to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you? How do? They come back, mother. What's the secret? The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant. I took the house of Brentwood on my return from India in 18 for the temporary accommodation of my family until I could find a permanent home for them. It had many advantages which made it particularly appropriate. It was within reach of Edinburgh, and my boy Roland, whose education had been considerably neglected, could go in and out to school, which was thought to be better for him than either leaving home altogether or staying there always with a tutor. The first of these expedients would have seemed preferable to me. The second commended itself to his mother, the doctor, like a judicious man. Took the midway between put him on his pony and let him ride into the high school. Every morning it'll do him all the good in the world, D.R. Simpson said, and when it's bad, whether there's a train. His mother accepted this solution of the difficulty more easily than I could have hoped, and our pale-faced boy, who had never known anything more invigorating than similar, began to encounter the brisk breezes of the north. In the subdued severity of the month of May, before the time of the vacation in July, we had the satisfaction of seeing him begin to acquire something of the brown and ruddy complexion of his school fellows. The English system did not commend itself to Scotland in these days. There was no little Eton at Fettes, nor do I think, if there had been, that a Gentile exotic of that class could have tempted either my wife or me. The lad was doubly precious to us, being the only one left us of many, and he was fragile in body, we believed, and deeply sensitive in mind. To keep him at home and yet to send him to school, to combine the advantages of the two systems, seemed to be everything that could be desired. The two girls also found at Brentwood everything they wanted. They were near enough to Edinburgh to have masters and lessons, as many as they required for completing that never-ending education which the young people seem to require nowadays. Their mother married me when she was younger than Agatha, and I should like to see them improve upon their mother. I myself was no more than 25 in age at which I see the young fellows now groping about them with no notion what they're going to do with their lives. However, I suppose every generation has a conceit of itself which elevates it in its own opinion above that which comes after it. Brentwood stands on that fine and wealthy slope of country, one of the richest in Scotland, which lies between the Pentland Hills and the FTH and Clear. Whether you could see the blue gleam like a bent bow embracing the wealthy fields and scattered houses of the great estuary on one side of you, and on the other the blue heights, not gigantic like those we have been used to, but just high enough for all the glories of the atmosphere, the play of clouds and sweet reflections which give to a hilly country an interest and a charm which nothing else can emulate Edinburgh with. Its two lesser heights, the castle, and the Colton Hill it spies and towers piercing through the smoke, and Arthur's seat lying crouched behind like a guardian, no longer very needful, taking his repose beside the well-beloved. Charge which is now, so to speak, able to take care of itself without him lay at. Our right hand from the lawn and drawing-room windows, we could see all these varieties of landscape the color was. Sometimes a little chilly, but sometimes also as animated and full of vicissitude. As a drama, I was never tired of it. Its color and freshness revived the eyes, which had grown weary of arid plains and blazing skies. It was always cheery and fresh and full of repose. The village of Brentwood lay almost under the house on the other side of the deep little ravine down which a stream, which ought to have been a lovely, wild, and frolicsome little river, flowed between its rocks and trees. The river, like so many in our district, had, however, in its earlier life been sacrificed to trade and was grimy with paper making, but this did not affect our pleasure in it so much as I have known it to affect other streams. Perhaps our water was more rapid, perhaps less clogged with dirt, and refuse our side of. The dell was charmingly accident, and clothed with fine trees, through which various paths wound down to the riverside and to the village bridge which crossed the stream. The village lay in a hollow and climbed with very prosaic houses. The other side village architecture does not flourish in Scotland. The blue slates and the grey stone are sworn foes to the picturesque, and though I do not for my part dislike the interior of an old-fashioned hewed and galleried church with its little family settlements on all sides, the square box outside with its bit of spy like a handle to lifted by his noddin', improvement to the landscape, still a cluster of houses on differing elevations with scraps of garden coming in between, a hedge with clothes laid out to dry, the opening of a street with its rural sociability, the women at their doors, the slow wagon lumbering along, give the center to the landscape. It was cheerful to look at and convenient in a hundred ways within ourselves. We had walks in plenty, the glen being always beautiful in all its phases, whether the woods were green in the spring or ruddy in the autumn. In the park which surrounded the house were the ruins of the former mansion of Brentwood, a much smaller and less important house than the solid Georgian edifice which we inhabited. The ruins were picturesque, however, and gave importance to the place. Even we who were but temporary tenants felt a vague pride in them, as if they somehow reflected a certain consequence upon ourselves. The old building had the remains of a tower, an indistinguishable mass of mason work overgrown with ivy, and the shells of walls attached to this were half filled up with soil. I never examined it closely, I'm ashamed to say. There was a large room, or would have been a large room, with the lower part of the windows still existing on the principal floor, and underneath other windows, which were perfect though half filled up with fallen soil and waving with a wild growth of brambles and chance growths of all kind. This was the oldest part of all. At a little distance were some very commonplace and disjointed fragments of building, one of them suggesting a certain pathos by its very commonness, and a complete wreck which it showed. This was the end of a low gable, a bit of gray wall, all encrusted with lichens in, which was a common doorway. Probably it had been a servant's entrance, a back door, or opening into what are called the offices. In Scotland, no offices remained. To be entered, pantry and kitchen had all been swept out of being, but there stood the doorway open and vacant, free to all the winds, to the rabbits and every wild creature it struck my the first time I went to Brentwood like a melancholic comment upon a life that was over a door that led to nothing closed once perhaps. With anxious care bolted and guarded now void of any meaning, it impressed me I remember from the first, so perhaps it may be said that my mind was prepared to attach to it an importance which nothing justified. The summer was a very happy period of repose for us all. The warmth of Indian suns was still in our veins. It seemed to us that we could never have enough of the greenness, the dewiness, the freshness of a northern landscape. Even its mists were pleasant to us, taking all the fever out of us and pouring in vigor and refreshment. In autumn we followed the fashion of the time and went away for change, which we did not in the least require. It was when the family has settled down for the winter, when the days were short and dark, and a rigorous rain of frost upon us, that the incidents occurred which alone could justify me in intruding upon the world my private affairs. These incidents were, however, of so curious a character that I hope my inevitable references to my own family and pressing personal interest will meet with a general pardon. I was absent in London when these events began. In London, an old Indian plunges back into the interests with which all his previous life has been associated and meets old friends at every step. I had been circulating among some half-dozen of these, enjoying the return of to my former life in shadow, though I had been so thankful in substance to throw it aside, and had missed some of my home letters, what with going down from Friday to Monday to old Benbow's place in the country, and stopping on the way back to dine and sleep at Sellers, and to take a look into Cross's stables, which occupied another day. It is never safe to miss one's letters in this transitory life. As the prayer book says, how can one ever be certain what is going to happen? All was well at home. I knew exactly, I thought, what they would have to say to me. The weather has been so fine that Roland has not once gone by train, and he enjoys the ride beyond anything. Dear Papa, be sure that you don't forget anything, but bring us so and so and so and so a list as long as my arm, dear girls, and dear mother. I would not for the world have forgotten their commissions or lost their little letters for all the Benbows and Crosses in the world, but I was confident in my home comfort and peacefulness when I got back to my club. However, 3 or 4 letters were lying, for one upon some of which I noticed the immediate urgent, which old-fashioned people and anxious people still believe will influence the post office and quicken the speed of the mails. I was about to open one of these when the club porter brought me 2 telegrams, one of which he said had arrived the night before I opened, as was to be expected, the last first, and this is what I read. Why don't you come, or answer, for God's sake come. He is much worse. This was a thunderbolt to fall upon a man's head who had only one son and lie the light of his eyes. The other telegram, which I opened with hands trembling so much that I lost time by my haste, was to much the same purport. No better doctor afraid of brain fever calls for you day and night. Let nothing detain you. The first thing I did was to look up the Timmets to see if there was any way of getting off sooner than by the night train, though I knew well enough that there was not. And then I read the letters which furnished, alas, too clearly all the details. They told me that the boy had been pale for some time, with a scared look. His mother had noticed it before I left home, but would not say anything to alarm me. This look had increased day by day. and soon it was observed that Roland came home at a wild gallop through the park, his pony panting, and in foam himself as white as a sheet, but with the perspiration streaming from his forehead. For a long time he had resisted all questioning, but at length had developed such strange changes of mood, showing a reluctance to go to school, a desire to be fetched in the carriage at night, which was a ridiculous piece of luxury, an unwillingness to go out into the grounds, and nervous start at every sound that his mother had insisted upon, an explanation when our boy Roland, who had never known what fear was, began to talk to her of voices he had heard in the park and shadows that had appeared to him among the ruins. My wife promptly put him to bed and sent for Dr. Simpson, which of course was the only thing to do. I hurried off that evening, as May supposed, with an anxious heart. How I got through the hours before the starting of the train I cannot tell. We must all be thankful for the quickness of the railway, when an anxiety but to have thrown myself into a post-sh as soon as horses could be put on would have been a relief. I got to Edinburgh very early in the blackness of the winter morning, and scarcely dead looked the man in the face at whom I gasped what news my wife had sent the broom for me, which I concluded before the man spoke was a bad sign. His answer was that stereotyped answer which leaves the imagination so wildly free. Just the same, what might that mean? The horses seemed to me to creep along the long, dark country road. As we dashed through the park, I thought I heard someone moaning among the trees, and clenched my fist at him, whoever he might be, with fury. Why had the fool of a woman at the gate allowed anyone to come in to disturb the quiet of the place? If I had not been in such hot haste to get home, I think I should have stopped the carriage and got out to see what it was that had made an entrance, and chosen my grounds of all places in the world when my boy was ill to grumble and groan in. But I had no reason to complain of our slow pace here. The horses flew like lightning along the intervening path, and drew up at the door, all panting, as if they had run a race. My wife stood waiting to receive me, with a pale face and a candle in her hand, which made her look paler still as the wind blew the flame about. He is sleeping, she said in a whisper, as if her voice might wake him, and I replied, when I could find my voice also, in a whisper, as though the jingling of the horse furniture and the sound of their hooves must not have been more dangerous. I stood on the steps with her a moment, almost afraid to go in now that I was here, and it seemed to me that I saw, without observing, if I may say so, that the horses were unwilling to turn round, though their stables lay that way, or that the men were unwilling. These things occurred to me afterwards, though at the moment I was not capable of anything but to ask questions and to hear of the condition of a boy. I looked at him from the door of his room, for we were afraid to go near lest we should disturb that blessed sleep. It looked like actual sleep, not the lethargy into which my wife told me he would sometimes fall. She told me everything in the next room, which communicated with his rising now and then, and go to the door of communication, and in this there was much that was very startling and confusing too. The mind, it appeared, that ever since the winter began, since it was early dark and night had fallen before his return from school, he'd been hearing voices among the ruins. At first only a groaning, he said, at which his pony was as much alarmed as he was, but by degrees a voice. The tears ran down my wife's cheeks as she described to me how he would start up in the night and cry out, "Oh, mother, let me, and oh, mother, let me in," with a post hose which rent her heart, and she sitting There all the time, only longing to do everything his heart could desire, but though she would try to soothe him, crying, "You're at home, my darling, I'm here. Don't you know me, your mother's?" Here, he would only stare at her, and after a while spring up again with the same cry. At other times he would be quite reasonable, she said, asking eagerly when I was coming, but declaring that he must go with me as soon as I did. So to let them in, the doctor thinks his nervous system must have received a shock. My wife said, "Oh, Henry, can it be that we've pushed him on too much with his work, a delicate boy like Roland? And what is his work in comparison with his health? Even you would think little of honors or prizes if it hurts the boy's health. Even I, as if I were an inhuman father sacrificing my child to my ambition, but I would not increase her trouble by taking notice." After a while, they persuaded me to lie down to rest and to eat, none of which things have been possible since I received their letters. The mere fact of being on the spot, of course, in itself was a great thing, and when I knew that I could be called in, the moment as soon as he was awake and wanted me, I felt capable, even in the dark, chill morning twilight, to snatch an hour or two sleep. As it happened, I was so worn out with the strain of anxiety, and he so quieted and consoled by knowing I had come, that I wasn't disturbed till the afternoon, when the twilight had again settled down. There was just daylight enough to see his face. When I went to him, and what a change in a fortnight! He was paler and more worn-eye, thought, than even in those dreadful days in the plains before we left India. His hair seemed to me to have grown long, and lank his eyes were like blazing lights projecting out of his white face. He got hold of my hand in a cold and tremulous clutch and waved to everybody to go away. Go away, even mother, he said. Go away. This went to her heart, for she did not like that even I should have more of the boy's confidence than herself. But my wife has never been a woman to think of herself, and she left us alone. Are they all gone? He said eagerly. They wouldn't let me speak. The doctor treated me as if I were a fool. You know I'm not a fool, Papa. Yes, yes, my boy, I know, but you're ill, and quiet is so necessary. You are not only not a fool, Roland, but you are reasonable and understand when you're ill you must deny yourself. You must not do everything that you might do being well. He waved his thin hand with a sort of indignation. Then, Father, I'm not ill, he cried. Oh, I thought when you came you wouldn't stop me. You would see the sense of it. What do you think is the matter with me? All of you Simpsons well enough, but he's only a doctor. What do you think is the matter with me? I'm no more ill then you are a doctor, of course. He thinks you're ill the moment he looks at you. That's what he's there for, and claps you in a bed, which is the best place for you at present, my dear boy. I made up my mind, cried the little fellow, that I would stand till you came home. I said to myself, I won't frighten mother and the girls. But now, Father, he cried, half jumping out of bed, it's not an illness. It's a secret. His eyes shone so wildly, his face was so swept with strong feeling that my heart sank within me. It could be nothing but fever that did it. And fever had been so fatal, I got him into my arms and put him back in a bed. Roland, I said, humoring the poor child, which I knew was the only way. If you're going to tell me this secret to do any good, you know, you must be quite quiet and not excite yourself. If you excite yourself, I mustn't let you speak. Yes, Father, said the boy. He was quite directly, like a man, as if he quite understood. When I had laid him back on his pillow, he looked up at me with that grateful, sweet look with which children, when they are ill, break one's heart. The water coming into his eyes in his weakness. I was sure as soon as you were here that you would know what to do. He said, to be sure, my boy, now keep quiet. and tell it all out like a man to think. I was telling lies to my own child, for I did it only to humor him, thinking poor little fellow's brain was wrong, yes. Father, father, there's someone in the park, someone that has been badly used. Hush, my dear, you remember, there's to be no excitement. Well, who is this somebody? And who has been ill-using him will soon put a stop to that, I cried Roland. But it is not so easy as you think. I don't know who it is. It's just a cry. Oh, if you could hear it gets into my head in my sleep. I heard it as clear, and they think that I'm dreaming or raving, perhaps, the boy said, with a sort of disdainful smile. This look of his perplexed me. It was less like fever than I thought. Are you quite sure you haven't dreamed it, Roland? I said, dreamed that he was springing up again when he suddenly bethought himself and lay down flat with the same sort of smile on his face. The pony heard it too. He said she jumped as if she'd been shot. If I hadn't grasped the reins, for I was frightened, father, no shame to you, my boy, said I, though I scarcely knew why if I hadn't held her like a leech she'd have pitched me over her head, and never drew breath till we're at the door. Did the pony dream it, he said with a soft disdain yet indulgence for my foolishness. Then he added slowly, it was only a cry the first time, and all the time before you went away. I wouldn't tell you, for it was so wretched to be frightened. I thought it might be a hare or rabbit snared, and I went in the morning and looked, but there was nothing. It was after you when I heard it really first. And this is what he says. He raised himself on his elbow, close to me, and looked me in the face. Oh, mother, let me in, oh, mother, let me in. As he said the words, a mist came over his face, the mouth quivered, the soft features all melted and changed, and when he had ended these pitiful words, dissolved in a shower of heavy tears. Was it a hallucination? Was it the fever of the brain? Was it the disordered fancy caused by great bodily weakness? How could I tell? I thought it wisest to accept it, as if it were all true. This is very touching, Roland, I said. Oh, if you had just heard it, father, I said to myself, if father heard it, he would do something. But Mama, you know, she's given over to Simpson, and that fellow is a doctor and never thinks of anything but clapping you in a bed. We mustn't blame Simpson for being a doctor, Roland. No, said my boy with delightful toleration and indulgence. Oh, no, that's a good of him. That's what he's for, I know that. But you're different, or just father, and you'll do something directly, Papa. Directly this very night, surely. I said, no doubt it is some little lost child. He gave me a sudden swift look, investigating my face, as though to see whether, after all this, was everything my Eminence's father came to know more than that. Then he got hold of my shoulder, clutching it with his thin hand. Look here, he said with a quiver in his voice. Suppose it wasn't living at all, my dear boy, how, then, could you have heard it? I said. He turned away from me with a pettish exclamation, as if you didn't know better than that. Do you want to tell me it's a ghost? I said. Roland withdrew his hand. His countenance assumed an aspect of great dignity and gravity. A slight quiver remained about his lips. Whatever it was, you always said we were not to call names. It was something in trouble. Oh, father, in terrible trouble. But my boy, I said, I was at my wit's end if it was a child that was lost, or any poor human creature. But, Roland, what do you want me to do? I should know. If I was you, said the child eagerly. That's what I always say to myself. Father will know. Oh, Papa, too. Have to face it night after night in such terrible, terrible trouble, and never to be able to do it any good. I don't want to cry. It's like a baby, I know, but what else can I do out there all by Itself in the ruin and nobody to help it. I can't bear it, I can't bear it, cried my generous boy, and in his weakness he burst out after many attempts to restrain into a great childish fit of sobbing and tears. I do not know that I ever was in a greater perplexity in my life, and afterwards when I thought of it there was something comic in it too. It's bad enough to find your child's mind possessed with a conviction that he's seen or heard a ghost, but that he should require you to go instantly and help that ghost was the most bewildering experience that had ever come my way. I am a sober man myself, and not superstitious, at least any more than everybody is superstitious. Of course, I don't believe in ghosts, but I don't deny any more than other people that there are stories which I cannot pretend to understand. My blood got a sort of chill in my veins at the idea that Roland should be a ghost seer, for that generally means a hysterical temperament and weak health and all that men most hate and fear for their children, but that I should take up his ghost and right its wrongs and save it from its trouble was such a mission as was enough to confuse any man. I did my best to console my boy without giving any promise of this astonishing kind, but he was too sharp for me, and he would have none of my caresses, with sobs breaking in at intervals upon his voice and the raindrops hanging on his eyelids. He yet returned to the charge. It'll be there now, it'll be there all the night. Oh, think, Papa, think, if it was me. I can't rest for thinking of it, don't, he cried, putting away my hand. Don't you go and help it, and Mother can take care of me. But Roland, what can I do? My boy opened his eyes, which were large with weakness and fever, and gave me a smile, such I think as sick children only know the secret of. I was sure you would know. As soon as you came, I always said, Father will know, and Mother, he cried with a softening of repose upon his face, his limbs relaxing, his form sinking with a luxurious ease into his bed. Mother can come and take care of me. I called her and saw him turn to her with the complete dependence of a child, and then I went away and left them as perplexed a man as any in Scotland. I must say, however, I had this consolation, that my mind was greatly eased about Roland. He might be under a hallucination, but his head was clear enough, and I didn't think him so ill as everybody else did. The girls were astonished, even at the ease with which I took it. How do you think he is? They said in a breath, coming round me, laying hold of me. Not half so ill as I expected. I said, not very bad at all. Oh, Poppy, you are a darling, cried Agatha, kissing me and crying upon my shoulder, while little Jeanie, who was as pale as Roland, clasped both her arms around mine and couldn't speak at all. I knew nothing about it, not half so much as Simpson, but they believed in me. They had a feeling that all would go right now. God is very good to you when your children look at you like that. It makes one humble, not proud. I was not worthy of it, and then I recollected that I had to act the part of a father to Roland's ghost, which made me almost laugh, though I might just as well have cried. It was the strangest mission that ever was entrusted to mortal man. It was then I remembered suddenly the looks of the men when they turned to take the broom to the stables in the dark that morning. They had not liked it, and the horses had not liked it. I remembered that even in my anxiety about Roland, I'd heard them tearing along the avenue back to the stables, and had made a memorandum mentally that I must speak of it. It seemed to me that the best thing I could do was to go to the stables now and make a few inquiries. It's impossible to fathom the Minds of rustics, there might be some devilry of practical joking or anything I knew, or they might have some interest. In getting up a bad reputation for the Brentwood Avenue, it was getting dark by the time I went out, and nobody who knows. The country will need to be told how black is the darkness of a November night and the high laurel bushes in you. Trees, I walked into the heart of the shrubberies 2 or 3 times, not seeing a step before me till I came out. Upon the broader carriage road where the trees opened a little, and there was a faint great glimmer of sky visible under, which the great limes and elms stood darkling like ghosts, but it grew black. Again, as I approached the corner where the ruins lay, both eyes and ears were on the alert, as may be supposed, but I could see nothing in the absolute gloom, and so far as I can recollect I heard nothing. Nevertheless, there came a strong impression upon me that somebody was. There it is, a sensation which most people have felt I've seen when it's been strong enough to wake me out of sleep, the sense of someone looking at me. I suppose my imagination had been affected by Roland's story, and the mystery of the darkness is always full of suggestions. I stamped my feet violently on the gravel to rouse myself and called out sharply, "Who's there?" Nobody answered, nor did I expect anyone to answer, but the impression had been made. I was so foolish that I didn't like to look back, but went sideways, keeping an eye on the gloom. Behind it was with great relief that I spied the lights in the stables, making a sort of oasis in the darkness. I walked very quickly into the midst of that lighted and cheerful place, and thought the clank of the grooms pale one of the pleasantest sounds I'd ever heard. The coachman was the head of this little colony, and it was to his house I went to pursue my investigations. He was a native of the district and had taken care of the place in the absence of the family. For years it was impossible but that he must know everything that was going on and all the traditions of the place. The men I could see eyed me anxiously when I thus appeared at such an hour among them, and followed me with their eyes to Jarvis's house, where he lived alone with his old wife, their children being all married and out in the world. Mrs. Jarvis met me with anxious questions. How was the poor young gentleman? But the others knew. I could see by their faces that not even this was the foremost thing in my mind. Noises, oh, I thought there be noises, the wind in the trees, and the waters soughing down the glen. As for the tramp's coronal, no, there's little of that kind of cattle about here. And Marin at the gates, a careful body Jarvis moved about with some embarrassment from one leg to another. As he spoke, he kept in the shade and didn't look at me more than he could help. Evidently his mind was perturbed, and he had reasons for keeping his own counsel. His wife sat by, giving him a quick look now and then, but saying nothing. The kitchen was very snug and warm and bright, as different as could be from the chill and mystery of the night outside. "I think you're trifling with me, Jarvis." I said. "Trifling, Colonel, know me. What would I trifle for if that cell was in the old house? I have no interest in it one way or the other, Sandy Hold." "Your peace," cried his wife imperatively. "And what am I to hold my peace for with a colonel standing there asking thee questions?" "I'm saying if the deal's sail, and I'm telling you to hold your peace," cried the woman in great excitement. "Dark November weather and Lang. Nasty kin, how dare you name a name that should not be spoken?" She threw down his stocking and got up also in great agitation. "I tell you, you never could keep it. It's no thing that'll hide. And the hail the kins as we'll, as you or me, tell the colonel straight out, or see, I'll hold your secrets in a secret." Well, to be nonsense, for the juniper bush was on the other side. He went about after this round and round, poking his taper everywhere, then returned to me on the inner side of the. While he scoffed, no longer his face was contracted and pale. How long does this go on? He whispered to me like a man who does not wish to interrupt someone who is speaking. I had become too much perturbed myself to remark whether the succession and changes of the voice were the same as last night. It suddenly went out in the air, almost as he was speaking, with a soft, reiterated sob, dying away. If there had been anything to be seen, I should have said that the person was at that moment crouching on the ground. Close to the door, we walked home, very silent. Afterwards, it was only when we were in sight of the house that I said, "What do you think of it?" "I can't tell what to think of it," he said quickly. He took, though he was a very temperate man, not the claret I was going to offer him, but some brandy from a tray, and swallowed it, almost undiluted. "Mind you, I don't believe a word of it," he said when he had lighted his candle, "but I can't tell what to think." He turned round to add, when he was halfway upstairs, "All of this, however, did me no good with the solution of my problem. I was to help this weeping, sobbing thing, which was already to me as distinct a personality as anything I knew, or what should I say to Roland? It was on my heart that my boy would die if I could not find some way of helping this creature. You may be surprised that I should speak of it in this way. I didn't know if it was man or woman, but I no more doubted that it was a soul in pain than I doubted my own being, and it was my business to soothe this pain, to deliver it if that was possible. Was ever such a task given to an anxious father? Trembling for his only boy, I felt in my heart, fantastic as it may appear, that I must fulfill this somehow, or part with my child, and you may conceive that, rather than do that, I was ready to die. But even my dying would not have advanced me, unless by bringing me into the same world with that seeker. At the door next morning, Simpson was out before breakfast, and came in with evident signs of the damp grass on his boots, and a look of worry and weariness which did not say much for the night he had passed. He improved a little after breakfast, and visited his 2 patients, for Bagley was still an invalid. I went out with him on his way to the train to hear what he had to say about the boy. He's going on very well. He said there are no complications as yet, but mind you, that's not a boy to be trifled with. Mortimer, not a word to him about last night. I had to tell him then of my last interview with Roland, and of the impossible demand he had made upon me, by which, though he tried to laugh, he was much discomposed as I could see. "We must just perjure ourselves all round," he said, "and swear you exercised it." But the man was too kind-hearted to be satisfied with that. "It's frightfully serious for you, Mortimer. I can't laugh as I should like to. I wish I saw a way out of it for your sake. By the way," he added shortly, "didn't you notice that juniper bush on the left-hand side there was one on the right hand of the door? I noticed you made that mistake last night." "Mistake?" he cried with a curious low laugh, pulling up the collar of his coat as though he felt cold. "There's no juniper there this morning. Left all right. Just go and see." As he stepped into the train a few minutes after, he looked back upon me and beckoned me for a parting word. "I'm coming back tonight," he said. "I don't think I had any feeling about this," as I turned away from that common bustle of the railway, which made my private preoccupations feel so strangely out of date. There had been a distinct satisfaction in my mind before that his skepticism had been so entirely defeated, but the more serious part of the matter pressed upon me now. I went straight from the railway to the man's, which stood on a Little plateau on the side of the river opposite to the woods of Brentwood, the minister was one of a class which is not so common in Scotland as it used to be. He was a man of good family, well educated in the Scotch way strong in philosophy, not so strong in Greek, strongest of all in experience, a man who had come across in the course of his life most people have noted had ever been in Scotland, and who was said to be very sound in doctrine without infringing the toleration with which old men who are good men are generally endowed. He was old-fashioned. Perhaps he did not think so much about the troubles problems of theology as many of the young men, or ask himself any hard questions about the confession of faith, but he understood human nature, which is perhaps better. He received me with a cordial welcome. Come away, Colonel Mortimer, he said. I'm all the more glad to see you that I feel it's a good sign for the boy he's doing well. God be praised, and the Lord bless him and keep him. He has many a poor body's prayers, and that could do nobody harm. He will need them all. Dr. Monreif said, in your counsel too, and I told him the story more than I had told Simpson. The old clergyman listened to me with many suppressed exclamations, and at the end the water stood in his eyes. That's just beautiful, he said. I do not mind to have heard anything like it. It's as fine as Burns when he wished deliverance to one that is prayed for in no kirk. Aye, so he would have you console the poor lost spirit. God bless the boy. There's something more than common in that Colonel Mortimer, and also the faith of him in his father. I would like to put that into a sermon. Then the old gentleman gave me an alarmed look and said, no, I wasn't meaning a sermon, but I must write it down for the children's record. I saw the thought that passed through his mind. Either he thought or he feared I would think of a funeral sermon. You may believe this did not make me more cheerful. I can scarcely say that Dr. Monreif gave me any advice. How could anyone advise on such a subject? But he said, I think I'll come too. I'm an old man. I'm less liable to be frightened than those that are further off the world unseen. It behooves me to think of my own journey. There I have no cut and dry beliefs on the subject. I'll come too. And maybe at the moment the Lord will put into our heads what to do. This gave me a little comfort more than Simpson had given me. To be clear about the cause of it was not my grand desire. It was another thing that was in my mind, my boy. As for the poor soul at the open door, I had no more doubt, as I have said, of its existence than I had of my own. It was no ghost to me. I knew the creature, and it was in trouble. That was my feeling about it. As it was Roland's to hear it first was a great shock to my nerves, but not now a man will get accustomed to anything. But to do something for it was the great problem. How was I to be serviceable to a being that was invisible, that was mortal no longer? Maybe at the moment the Lord will put it into our heads. This is very old-fashioned phraseology, and a week before most likely I should have smiled, though always with kindness, at Dr. Monreif's cradle. But there was a great comfort, whether rational or otherwise I cannot say, in the mere sound of the words. The road to the station and the village lay through the glen, not by the ruins. But though the sunshine and the fresh air and the beauty of the trees and the sound of the water were all very soothing to the spirits, my mind was so full of my own subject that I could not refrain from turning to the right hand as I got to the top of the glen and going straight to the place which I may call the scene of all my thoughts. It was lying in the full sunshine like all the rest of the world. The ruined gable looked due east, and in the present aspect of the sun, the light streamed. Down through the doorway as our lantern had done throwing a flood of light upon the damp grass. Beyond there was a strange suggestion in the open door, so feudal a kind of emblem, of vanity all free around so that you could go where you pleased, and yet that semblance of an enclosure, that way of entrance unnecessary, leading to nothing. And why any creature should pray and weep to get into the nothing or be kept. Out by nothing you couldn't dwell upon it, or made your brain go round-eye. Remembered, however, what Simpson said about the juniper with a little smile in my own mind as to the inaccuracy of recollection, which even a scientific man will be guilty of. I could see now the light of my lantern gleaming upon the wet, glistening surface of the spiky leaves at the right hand, and he ready to go to the stake for it that it was at. The left I went round to make sure, and then I saw what he had said right, or left there was no juniper at all. I was confounded by this, though it was entirely a matter of detail, nothing at all a bush of brambles waving the grass, growing up to the very walls. But after all, though it gave me a shock for a moment, what did that matter? There were marks as if a number of footsteps had been up and down in front of the door, but these might have been our steps, and all was bright and peaceful, and still I poked about the other ruin, the larger ruins of the old house for some time, as I had done before. There were marks upon the grass here and there. I couldn't call them footsteps all about, but that told. For nothing one way or another, I had examined the ruined rooms closely the first day. They were half filled up with soil and debris, withered brackens, and bramble, no refuge for anyone there. It vexed me that Jarvis should see me coming from that spot when he came up from me to get his orders. I don't know whether my nocturnal expeditions had got wind among the servants, but there was a significant look in his face. Something in it I felt was like my own sensation when Simpson, in the midst of his skepticism, was struck dumb. Jarvis felt satisfied that his veracity had been put beyond question. I never spoke to a servant of mine in such a peremptory tone before I sent him away with a flea in his lug, as the man described it. Afterwards, interference of any kind was intolerable to me at such a moment. But what was strangest of all was I couldn't face Roland. I didn't go up to his room as I would have naturally done at once. This the girls couldn't understand. They saw there was some mystery in it. Mother has gone to lie down, Agatha said. He has had such a good night, but he wants you so, Papa, cried little Jeanie, always with her two arms embracing mine in a pretty way she had. I was obliged to go at last. But what could I say? I could only kiss him and tell him to keep still, that I was doing all I could. There is something mystical about the patience of a child that will come all right, won't it, Father? He said. God grant it, may I hope so, Roland. Oh, yes, it will come all right. Perhaps he understood that in the midst of my anxiety I could not stay with him as I should have done otherwise. But the girls were more surprised than it is possible to describe. They looked at me with wondering eyes. If I were ill, Papa, and you only stayed with me a moment, I should break my heart, said Agatha. But the boy had a sympathetic feeling. He knew that of my own. While I would not have done it, I shut myself up in the library where I could not rest, but kept pacing up and down like a caged beast. What could I do? And if I could do nothing, what would become of my boy? These were the questions that, without ceasing, pursued each other through my mind. Simpson came out to dinner, and when the house was all still and most of the servants in bed, we went out and met D'Armand Reef, as we had appointed, at the head of the glen. Simpson, for his part, was disposed to scoff at the doctor if there are to be any spells, I'll cut the whole concern, he said. I did not make him any reply. I had not invited him. He could go or come as he pleased. He was very talkative, far more so than suited my humor, as we went on. One thing is certain, there must be some human agency. He said it's all bosh about apparitions. I've never investigated the laws of sound to any great extent, and there's a great deal in ventriloquism that we don't know much about. If it's the same to you, I said, I wish you'd keep all that to yourself, Simpson. It doesn't suit my state of mind. Oh, well, I hope I know how to respect idiosyncrasy, he said. The very tone of his voice irritated me beyond measure. These scientific fellows, I wonder people put up with them as they do when you have no mind for their cold-blooded confidence. Dr. Monreef met us about 11 o'clock. The same time as on the previous night. He was a large man with a venerable countenance and white hair, old, but in full vigor, and thinking less of a cold night walk than many a younger man. He had his lantern, as I had. We were fully provided with means of lighting the place, and we were all of us resolute men. We had a rapid consultation as we went up, and the result was that we divided into different posts. Dr. Monreef remained inside the wall, if you can call that inside, where there was no wall, but one Simpson, who placed himself on the side next to ruins, so as to intercept any communication with the old house, which was what his mind was fixed upon. I was posted on the other side. To say that nothing could come near without being seen was self-evident. It had been so also on the previous night. Now, with our 3 lights in the midst of the darkness, the whole place seemed illuminated. Dr. Monreef's lantern, which was a large one, without any means of shutting up, an old-fashioned lantern, with a pierced and ornamental top, shone steadily, the rays shooting out of it upward into the gloom. He placed it on the grass, where in the middle of the room, if this had been a room, would have been the usual effect of the light streaming out the doorway, was prevented by the illumination which Simpson and I on either side supplied. With these differences, everything seemed as on the previous night, and what occurred was exactly the same, with the same air of repetition, point for point. As I had formerly remarked, I declare that it seemed to me as if I were pushed against, put aside by the owner of the voice, as he paced up and down in his trouble, though these are perfectly futile words, seeing that the stream of light from my lantern and that from Simpson's taper lay broad and clear, without a shadow, without the smallest break across the entire breadth of the grass. I had ceased even to be alarmed. For my part, my heart was rent with pity and troubled pity for the poor, suffering human creature that moaned and pleaded so, and trouble for myself and my boy God. If I could not find any help, and what help could I find? Roland would die. We were all perfectly still till the first outburst was exhausted. As I knew by experience, it would be Dr. Monreef, to whom it was new, was quite motionless on the other side of the wall. As we were in our places, my heart had remained almost at its usual beating during the voice. I was used to it, did not rouse all my pulses as it did at first, but just as it threw itself sobbing at the door, I cannot use other words there, suddenly came something which sent the blood coursing through my veins and my heart into my mouth. It was a voice inside the wall, the minister's well-known voice. I would have been prepared for it in any kind of auguration, but I was not prepared for what I heard. It came out with a sort of stammering, as if too much moved for utterance. Willy, Willy, oh God, preserve us. Is it you? These simple words had an effect upon me that the voice of the invisible creature had ceased to have. I thought the old man whom I had brought into this danger had gone mad with terror. I made a dash round to the other side of the wall, half crazed myself with the thought he was standing where I'd left him, his shadow thrown vague and large upon the grass by the lantern which stood at his feet. I lifted my own light to see his face as I rushed forward. He was very pale, his eyes wet and glistening, his mouth quivering with parted lips. He neither saw nor heard me. We that had gone through this experience before had crouched towards each other to get a little strength to bear it, but he was not even aware that I was there. His whole being seemed absorbed in anxiety and tenderness. He held out his hands, which trembled, but it seemed to me, with eagerness, not fear. He went on speaking all the time. Willie, if it is you, and it's you if it's not a delusion of Satan. Willie, lad, why come ye here frighting them that know you not? Why came you not to me? He seemed to wait for an answer when his voice ceased. His countenance, every line moving, continued to speak. Simpson gave me another terrible shock, stealing into the open doorway with his light, as much or stricken as wildly curious as I. But the minister resumed without seeing Simpson, speaking to someone else. His voice took a tone of expostulation. Is it right to come here? Your mother's gone with your name on her lips. Do you think she would ever close her door on her own, lad? Do you think the Lord will close the door? Ye faint-hearted creature, no, I forbid you, cried the old man. The sobbing voice had begun to resume its cries. He made a step forward, calling out the last words in a voice of command. I forbid ye, cry out no more to man. Go home, you wandering spirit, go home, do you hear? Me that christened ye, that have struggled with ye, that have wrestled for ye with the Lord, hear the loud tones of his voice sank into tenderness. And her too, poor woman, her you're calling upon, she's not here. You'll find her with the Lord. Go there and seek her. Not here, do you hear me, lad? Go after her, he'll let you. And though it's late, man, take heart. If you will lie and sob and greet, let it be at heaven's gate and not your poor mother's ruined door. He stopped to get his breath, and the voice had stopped, not as it had done before when its time was exhausted and all its repetition said, but with a sobbing catch in a breath as if overruled. Then the minister spoke again. Are you hearing me, Willie? Oh, laddie, you've liked the beggy elements all your days. Be done with them. Now go home to the Father are. You hearing me here? The old man sank down upon his knees, his face raised upwards, his hands held up with a tremble in them, all white in the light. In the midst of the darkness, I resisted as long as I could, though I cannot tell why. Then I too dropped upon my knees. Simpson all the time stood in the doorway with an expression in his face such as words could not tell. His underlip dropped, his eyes wild, staring. It seemed to be to him that image of blank ignorance and wonder that we were praying all the time. The voice with a low, arrested sobbing lay just where he was standing. As I thought, Lord, the minister said, Lord, take him into thy everlasting habitations. The mother, he cries, to is with thee who can open to him. But thee, Lord, when is it too late for thee? Or what is too hard for thee, Lord? Let that woman there draw him in over, let him draw him in over. I sprang forward to catch something in my arms that flung itself wildly within the door. The illusion was so strong that I never paused till I felt my forehead graze against the wall and my hands clutched the ground, for there was nobody There to save from falling as in my foolishness, I thought Simpson held out. His hand to me to help me up, he was trembling and cold as lower lip, hanging his speech almost inarticulate. "It's gone," he said, stammering, "it's gone." We leaned upon each other for a moment, trembling so much both of us that the whole scene trembled as if it were going to dissolve and disappear, and yet as long as I live, I will never forget it, the shining of the strange lights, the blackness all round the kneeling figure with all the whiteness of the light concentrated on its white venerable head. And uplifted hands, a strange solemn stillness seemed to close all around us. By intervals a single syllable "Lord, Lord" came from the old minister's lips. He saw none of us, nor thought of us. I never knew how long we stood like sentinels guarding him at his prayers, holding our lights in a confused, dazed way, not knowing what we did. But at last he rose from his knees and, standing up at his full height, raised his arms as a Scotchmanner is at the end of a religious service, and solemnly gave the apostolic benediction to the silent earth, the dark woods, the wide, breathing atmosphere, for we were but spectators, gasping at our men. It seemed to me that it must be the middle of the night as we all walked back. It was in reality very late. Dr. Monreef put his arm into mine. He walked slowly with an air of exhaustion. It was as if we were coming from a deathbed. Something hushed and solemnized the very air. There was that sense of relief in it which there always is at the end of a death struggle, and nature persistent, never daunted, came back in all of us as we returned into the ways of life. We said nothing to each other indeed for a time, but when we got clear of the trees and reached the opening near the house where we could see the sky, Dr. Monreef himself was the first to speak. "I must be going," he said. "It's very late, I'm afraid. I will go down the glen as I came, but not alone. I'm going with you, Dr. Well. I will not oppose it. I am an old man, and agitation weighs more than work. Yes, I'll be thankful of your arm tonight. Colonel, you've done me more good turns than one." I pressed his hand on my arm, not feeling able to speak. But Simpson, who turned with us, and who had gone along all this time with his taper flaring in entire unconsciousness, came to himself, apparently at the sound of our voices, and put out that wild little torch with a quick movement, as if of shame. "Let me carry a lantern," he said. "It's heavy." He recovered with a spring, and in a moment from the awe-stricken spectator he had became himself skeptical and cynical. "I should like to ask you a question," he said. "Do you believe in purgatory, doctor?" "It's not in the tenets of the church, so far as I know, sir," said Dr. Monreef. "An old man like me is sometimes not very sure what he believes. There's just one thing I'm certain of, and that is the loving kindness of God. But I thought that was in this life." "I'm no theologian, sir," said the old man, again with a tremor in him, which I could feel going over all his frame. "If I saw a friend of mine within the gates of hell, I would not despair, but his father would take him by the hand still if he cried like you. It's very strange, very strange. I can't see through it that there must be human agency. I feel sure, doctor, what made you decide upon the person and the name?" The minister put out his hand with the impatience which a man might show if he were asked how he recognized his brother. "Tuts," he said in familiar speech, then more solemnly, "how should I not recognize a person that I know better, far better than I know you?" "Then you saw the man?" Dr. Monreef made no reply. He moved his hand again with a little impatient movement and walked on, leaning heavily on my arm, and we went on for a Long time without another word, threading the dark paths, which were steep and slippery with the damp of winter the air. Was very still not more than enough to make a faint sighing in the branches which mingled with the sound of the water to which we were descending. When we spoke again, it was about indifferent matters about the height of the river. In the recent rains we parted with the minister at his own door, where his old housekeeper appeared in great perturbation waiting for him. "Hey me, minister, the young gentleman will be worse," she cried, far from that better. "God bless him," dear Monreef said. I think if Simpson had begun again to me with his questions, I should have pitched him over the rocks as we returned up the glen, but he was silent by good inspiration, and the sky was clearer than it had been for many nights, shining high over the trees with here and there a star faintly gleaming through the wilderness of dark and bare branches. The air, as I have said, was very soft in them. With a subdued and peaceful cadence, it was real like every natural sound, and came to us like a hush of peace and relief. I thought there was a sound in it, as of the breath of a sleeper, and it seemed clear to me that Roland must be sleeping satisfied and calm. We went up to his room. When he went in there, we found a complete hush of rest. My wife looked up out of doze and gave me a smile. "I think he's a great deal better, but you are very late," she said in a whisper, shading the light with her hand that the doctor might see his patient. The boy had got back to something like his own color. He woke as we stood all around his bed. His eyes had the happy, half-awakened look of childhood, glad to shut again, yet pleased with the interruption in the glimmer of the light. I stooped over him and kissed his forehead, which was moist and cool. "All is well, Roland," I said. He looked up at me with a glance of pleasure and took my hand and laid his cheek upon it, and so went to sleep for some nights after I watched among the ruins, spending all the dark hours up to midnight patrolling about the bit of wall which was associated with so many emotions. But I heard nothing and saw nothing beyond the quiet course of nature, nor, as far as I am aware, has anything been heard again. Dr. Moncrief gave me the history of a youth whom he never hesitated to name. I did not ask, as Simpson did, how he recognized him. He had been a prodigal, weak, foolish, easily imposed upon and led away, as people say. All that we had heard had passed actually in life. The doctor said the young man had come home thus a day or two after his mother died, who was no more than the housekeeper in the old house, and distracted with the news, had thrown himself down at the door and called upon her to let him in. The old man could scarcely speak of it for tears. To me, it seemed as if heaven help us how little do we know about anything a scene like that might impress itself somehow upon the hidden heart of nature. I do not pretend to know how, but the repetition had struck me at the time as in its terrible strangeness and incomprehensibility, almost mechanical, as if the unseen actor could not exceed or vary, but was bound to reenact the whole. One thing that struck me, however, greatly was the likeness between the old minister and my boy in the manner of regarding these strange phenomena. Dr. Moncrief was not terrified as I had been myself, and all the rest of us. It was no ghost, as I fear we all vulgarly considered it to him, but a poor creature whom he knew under these conditions, just as he had known him in the flesh, having no doubt of his identity. And to Roland, it was the same, this spirit in pain. If it was a spirit, this voice out of the unseen was a poor fellow creature in misery to be succored and helped out of his trouble. To my boy, he spoke to me quite frankly about it when he got Better I knew father would find out some way, he said, and this was when he was strong and well, and all idea that he would turn hysterical or become a seer of visions had happily passed away. I must add one curious fact, which does not seem to me to have any relation to the above, but which Simpson made great use of as the human agency which he was. Determined to find somehow, we had examined the ruins very closely at the time of these occurrences afterwards. When all was over, as we went casually about them one Sunday afternoon in the idleness of that unemployed day, Simpson, with his stick penetrated an old window which had been entirely blocked up with fallen soil, he jumped down into it in great excitement, and called me to follow. There we found a little hole, for it was more a hole than a room, entirely hidden under the ivy and ruins, in which there was a quantity of straw laid in the corner, as if someone had made a bed there, and some remains of crusts about the floor, that this unknown being, who was the author of all the mysterious sounds we heard, he's convinced I told you it was human agency, he said triumphantly. He forgets, I suppose, how he and I stood with our light, seeing nothing, while the space between us was audibly transversed by something that could speak and sob and suffer. There is no argument with men of this kind, he is ready to get up and laugh against me on this slender ground. I was puzzled myself. I couldn't make it out, but I always felt convinced human agency was at the bottom of it, and here it is, and a very clever fellow. He must have been the doctor, says Bagley left my service as soon as he got well. He assured me it was no want of respect, but he could not stand them kind of things, and the man was so shaken and ghastly that I was glad to give him a present and let him go for my own part. One made a point of staying out the time, the 2 years for which I had taken Brentwood, but I did not renew my tenny by. That time we had settled and found for ourselves a pleasant home of our own. I must add that when the doctor defies me, I can always bring back gravity to his countenance and a pause in his railing when I remind him of the juniper bush. To me, that was a matter of little importance. I could believe I was mistaken. I didn't care about it one way or the other, but on his mind the effect was different. The miserable voice, the spirit in pain, he could think of as the result of ventriloquism or reverberation, or anything you please, an elaborate prolonged hoax executed somehow by that had found a lodging in the old tower. But the juniper bush staggered him. Things have effect so different on the minds of different men. Hi, so this is the part where I just to try and persuade you to become a Patreon. The benefit of that is you getting a library of ad-fee stories that you can download at your leisure. Of the benefit for me is that you enable me to keep going. If nobody becomes a patron, then I can't keep doing it, and everybody may think or somebody else will do it, and I don't have to. But if you can and you do appreciate my work, then I would really appreciate you signing up on the link above to become a patron. Go on. You know you want me to keep making these stories. So that was The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant. Now I've got to apologize for the background noise. The scrap man's very busy at the moment. You may have heard bits of scrapping during that one, and I wait until until there's a break, but there never is a break because his job is collecting pieces of broken metal, old fridges, bits of cars, and he has a crane that picks them up and empties bits of metal into huge skips, and then they smash them, and then a bit later they get metal saws and chop them up. And all this is a really, really noisy a practice. I try to minimize that, but I Can't do it, and then over we've got a piece of green between us, and a small river over the other side of that is a factory that makes metal boxes, and they're quite a big concern, and they're on, they work 24 hours, it's never quiet. And on the other side from us, on the other side of the house, is a road which isn't too busy, but you get motorbikes, you get police cars, you get those the young men have started taking the silencers out of their cars to make them really, really loud, and they gun the engines, and then they're very impressed by it, and I think they think everybody else thinks how cool they are, but me and I can't express. Because some bot will scrape the audio of this and analyze it. And if I'm saying anything that might suggest that I would like just put a stop to that, then the police will be around them anyway, because they got nothing better to do anyway. That being said, you're just gonna have to put up with it. I can only give you what I can give you, so and I know most of you are quite happy with that, and those of you who aren't happy with that, just go somewhere else, go and do one as they say. So let me tell you about Margaret Oliphant. I should say, actually, I'm not in a bad mood, I'm in a good mood, because I was worried that Jasper had cancer. Well, we had a biopsy. He had cancer originally. When he was a small pup, he had his toe chopped off, and we were okay for 2 years. And then there was this saw. So we took him to the vets, and they biopsied it, and it said it was cancerous. So that was really worrying for me, because I thought the worst thing they would do would be they would take his arm off, at his leg off, at his shoulder blade. And he's a 2-year-old dog, it's so. I was very unhappy, and then I went to the vets yesterday, and they said that they've done a punch biopsy, and there's no cancer cells in it, so it's a miracle, really. And we've been praying for a miracle in Sheila's. Been on the internet, and all her ladies generally is ladies who do this healing stuff. She's asked him to send the healing. I don't know, and I've been kind of talking to God and doing a bit of praying, and so if this is actually relevant to this story, to be honest, because if you're a rationalist viewpoint and you believe there must be some human agency, then you would say, oh, they simply made a mistake the first time to the lab that saw the cancer. Cells the first time was wrong, just was a mistake, contaminated sample, whatever. But if you are like some of the characters Dr. on Creef Roland, and increasingly Colonel Mortimer in this story, you may actually believe in the intervention of divine providence. I incline to that, to be honest. So anyway, let me tell you about Margaret Oliphant. This is a classic story, a classic Victorian ghost story, a late Victorian ghost story, and honestly, I think it's with Turn of the Screw. It's up there with the Whistle, and by Mr. James, and Oliver Onions, I've forgotten the name of. The thing now, the fair one, the beckoning fair one, these are classic Victorian ghost stories, and I think Open Door is one, and I've put off doing it for 2 reasons. One is it's long, and the second is I'd have to do my Scottish accent now. I quite like doing my Scottish accent. But there was a guy commented on one of the things that I was deliberately taking the piss, and I'm not doing that at all. And if I ever do an accent, I'm never mocking the people who speak like that, never, because I'm too interested in language to do that, and particularly this Scottish, which is my own heritage as well. So anyway, so Margaret Oliphant. 1828, she was born at Muselborough Well at Wallingford, near Muselborough. I got a great suit in Muselborough, once in charity shop there. I'm a very cheap, it's just to the east of Edinburgh, on the shores of the F.A., southern shores of the Fair Amand. My parents courted there. In fact, I remember them telling me that anyway, separately, and then she died in Wimbledon in Surrey in 1897, a long way in British terms between Muselbra and Wimbledon. Wimbledon's a nice place. What was the pub we used to go into in Wimbledon with my friend Nick? My friend Nick lived in Wimbledon, so when I was in my 20s, I used to go and see him, their lovely place in Crooked. Billet, that was the one, and I don't know, I haven't been to Wimbledon for years, but it was nice then, so I don't know why. I'm giving you all these personal anecdotes when I should be getting straight into the story. So anyway, her early life was divided between Scotland and Liverpool, and she was a bright girl, and she was very interested in literature and very interested in words. So in 1849, she married her cousin Frank Wilson Olent. Very convenient. She didn't need to change her name. He was an artist, and they moved to London, and they were happy enough to begin with, but his health went down the pan, and they had a lot of financial worries, and I think that's probably true for anybody who's trying to make a living as an artist. He died in 1859, so she was a relatively young widow. So let me work out. So she'd be 31, she'd be 31, and she had 3 children to support herself. So she decided she was going to become an author, and she wrote 98 novels alongside a vast array of short stories, and she did biographies of Joan of Arc and her cousin Margaret Oliphant. She did a historical works and a continuous stream of critical essays for Blackwood's magazine, and she was a mainstay in Blackwood's magazine for decades, and she was outstanding. What a workhorse. She was a great favorite of the readers, the critical critics. I didn't like her so much, they said that she was readable and skillful in her writing, but sometimes dismissed as a merely commercially successful writer. You know that great. Slight, these are the people who can't make a living, and they don't make any money, and they kind of take refuge in the fact that they're great artists. So, well, I'm an artist, the fact that nobody likes what I do just shows how stupid they are, and I don't make any money, but I'm an artist, so it's a kind of defense mechanism, isn't it? And you see that the greatest example of this, of course, is stereophonics. And I used to talk about stereophonics that, Mr. Writer, whereby Kelly Jones was heavily criticized on the grounds that he writes popular songs by this writer. And, it's worth listening to the lyrics that Kelly has murderous thoughts towards his writer didn't actually kill him. So we don't need the police to go around and I don't think you'd actually need to do anything these days to have the police come around you. Just need to say things that like that you might want to hurt a critic, and then there we are. Oh, I am peppery though today. I don't know why, and I should be in a good mood. I was in. It's been gorgeous weather. I've been out with the dogs. I've got nothing to complain about. But I'm sticking up for Kelly Jones, and I'm sticking up for Margaret Oliphant, and people like them, I would say I often have a view about the ease of narration, and that's, a pretty narrow view, because most people don't narrate stories, or have ever narrated stories, only if a handful of us who do it. And, but we have a little brotherhood, as I say, we have the Narrators Club and a pal just off Palm Mall, where we sit back in our leather bound armchairs and smoke cigars and drink claret and talk about stories. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But I find our language is sort of typical of a kind of a Henry James type language, a late Victorian elaboration whereby they will give you and Virginia Woolf bit later but what they do is they start a sentence, they put a subclause in the as, and it mimics thought. I think it's probably deliberate. So this is way I think am I. Was walking down the glen, the moon shone. And I remembered Sister Jenny's old porcupine pie, and then I recalled the state of the economy, and it's blah, 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 blah chain of thought. And it's the trouble with narrating that is you. So right how you narrate is me telling you you start off with a sentiment, okay. So a certain sentence has a sentiment she's telling you something with a certain emotional charge. So when I'm narrating, I identify what that emotional charge is, whether it's fear, whether it's love, whether it's a nostalgia, whatever it is. Whether it's just matter of fact, and also the character of the person saying it, are they matter of fact? Like Simpson, are they an older, wiser, spiritual person like Dr. McCreef? Whatever, but you start off with a sentence with a sentiment, and then the subclause might have a different sentiment, and the subclause of the subclause might have a different sentiment. So you have to modify your voice, you're frightened, and then she has this kind of whimsical thought. Oh, whimsical. And by the end you get to the final clause, you have to remember what the initial sentiment was, It was a sentiment, the sentence was introduced, the yes sentence usually. Long sentence was introduced with a particular emotion which has drifted off through the subclauses, or there's been different emotions introduced, and you have to jump back to the original emotion to finish the sentence when you get to it, and that is quite difficult. And I found myself doing lots of takes of this now. Who did I do? I was done some recently, and I talked about this guy's serviceable prose. I think it was Elliot O'Donnell, and you don't have to do that with him. And with modern writers, they don't usually do that. Your sentence has a consistent sentiment right throughout, and it's much easier to narrate. It's not a criticism, it's just an observation. Really, but it's hard to do, that's all I'm saying. So I think let's talk about her religion, though I will come back to this. So her religious views were complex and nuanced. There's something that says she had sympathies towards the Free Church. So the Free Church in Scotland is a Calvinistic, I'm probably simplifying things, and somebody belongs to the Free Church will correct me, quite severe and Protestant, no dancing on A. Sunday all you do is read your Bible, and no frivolity, no freery, no levity you. No, so I read somewhere that she had some sympathies towards this, but she was born Presbyterian, which is a Protestant sect, a Calvinistic towards a Calvinistic side of things, and so that is to say kind of hardline Protestant, really, and I'm all simple now. I should just digress. My grandmother was what they call primitive Methodist. So if you know the history of Anglican, so let's go, we have the Christian church. It's established. I'm going to gallop through this in it. And then it splits in the 11th century into the Eastern Church, so-called Orthodox Church, and the Western Church. And it was split over two things, really. One was the primacy of the Pope. The Western Church said the Bishop of Rome is the top bishop, and he is boss because he is in the direct line of street. Peter, who Christ gave the keys to, hence the keys badges, so he should be top dog. And all the other patriarchs of Alexandria, Constantinople, said, no, you just among equals. So, and then the other thing was the filioque does. The Holy Spirit proceed from the Father and the Son, or just from the Father. So the Roman Church said from the Father. And the Son, filio, dative of filio, of yes, son, chew, and the and from the Father, that's what that means, and that was the cause of the split, and then roll forward into the Luther in the 16th century, and then the split of Protestantism, which was again a rebellion, was really a rebellion against the authority of the Catholic Church. Really, I mean, it's more complex than that. And then so you have Protestantism, and then you have kind of branches of Protestantism, and then you have like the more kind of I was say left wing. I don't know it. Doesn't map onto politics, but you know more hard line if you like. And so the Free Church and the primitive Methodist caused the rand is. So then you have Anglicanism, which I hope you're with me, still split from the Catholic Church in England, became Protestant, probably not. Protestant in origin, I'm not sure Henry VII wanted to be Protestant. He wasn't a Protestant, but it was kind of captured by Protestantism. And there's always been a battle, as we'll come to, within Anglicanism, the Anglican Church. So whether the Archbishop of Canterbury rather than the Pope is now top dog, but in terms of procedural stuff, the Anglican Church remained very similar to the Catholic Church for a long time, and is in many ways now. The again and the then, in the early 19th century, I may be slightly off now. When was Wesley, there's a split of the Anglican Church, and it becomes the Methodist split, and they want a kind of more simpler, more hardline Protestant church, and there's a split from the Methodists, and the primitive Methodists who later rejoined Methodism, but they were like, so the chapel, and it was a chapel rather than a church, and was very spare. No decoration that was considered frivolous, and they were iconoclastic. Really, no decoration, no gold, a simple table, not even a crucifix, not even a cross. Even sometimes you might get a wooden cross, but I think the primitives didn't even like that, so there we are. It is relevant, this is relevant to what I'm going to say in the story. So Margaret Oliphant was open to a broader understanding even, though she probably came from quite an ultra background or serious Protestant background. She's never a Catholic, but she became more open. I'm going to talk about that the Open Door. So the Open Door was published in 1881, and you know the story. You just heard it now. It struck me that Brentwood, there is no Brentwood. It's between the Pentland Hills and the further of Forth, and it struck me the landscape you were describing of these wooded glens is very like that. Midlothian area around Bonny Rig and Rosslyn. So there's Rosslyn Chapel, famous of course, and Rosslyn Castle near it. And I remember walking through and there's very steep glens there, very wooded, and there's ruins of the castle there, and that's where it was. I briefly went out with a girl from a Bonny Rig years ago, and she was living in one part of a big Victorian mansion, so that's where I was in this, and I think she was from East Loy, but Muscle, they're not very far apart, So anyway, by the by, I want to talk about the rule of 3-3. So the rule of 3 is an ubiquitous motive found across countless folk tales, and it's this 3 times thing seems to be really important psychologically too. People, things are done 3 times, things happen 3 times, and you find it in folk tales and fiction. And it's almost like a completeness when something's done 1 time, it's not complete. When it's done 2 times, it still doesn't feel complete. The 3rd time usually changes it over. So repetition makes things more memorable, often in folk tales when you have oral tales whereby, so oral folk, oral storytelling across the world from Homer to kind of shepherds in the Caucasus or in the Shanahi in the Gaelic world, and I don't know enough about sort of like indigenous Australian storytelling. With this, the song lines and things like that are Native American stuff or shamanic stuff I don't know enough about. That but what you find is they use runs of words, so Homer certainly does. But I remember when I was studying this at university, I think Albanian does. As well, but it's common in the Irish, the Gaelic, you would do that, so. You would use the same phrases again, and it's this repetition. It's remember how music is about patterns. It's about setting up patterns and interrupting patterns. That's the pleasure of music we anticipate. And then our anticipation is challenged. There's pleasure in both the anticipation. I'm not a musician either, so. But you know what I'm saying, and the story does that the first time it happens. Is this the second time it happens? Is this the third time it happens? It's slightly different. We see this in the story, don't we? So the first time he goes out on Colonel Mortimer, he goes out on his own, and he's very frightened. This is the first time he goes with Bagley, that's right, and Bagley collapses second times. He goes with Dr. Simpson, and it's slightly different. He's not as frightened. He is having a character arc. He is no longer frightened. But he's beginning to feel sympathy for this poor creature, and the third time he goes with Simpson and Dr. Monreef, and it is different. There's a kind of redemption there. So I'm often in. I've got a note of examples of three, and you have three brothers or sisters, don't you? The other first two fail at a task, while the third, often the youngest and most unassuming, succeeds. The three little pigs, the three trials, the three tasks, the three wishes, and it does appear that you three is really important. And if you're a writer yourself, I just suggest that you win. You're writing a story, have something happen three times. Every time is slightly different. The first two times are failures, and the third time is a success, if you like, and that is a very gratifying feeling. We also need to talk about the German philosopher Hegel, who has famously the dialectic. So I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but it's behind Marxism. It's behind a lot of modern thought. He was massively influential. Hegel, he wasn't a Marxist himself, but Marx was influenced by him. So what you have is, you have thesis, which is your point. You have antithesis, which is the opposite of the point. And then you have synthesis, which is the solution by incorporating two into a third, but different thing. You see that rule of three going in there. One is this, two is its opposite, and three is the solution, which incorporates both, which brings the opposites together. And I think that's psychologically really important to people, that bringing together of opposites. In other words, we won't go into this Nicholas Duza back, and he was a monk back in the late medieval period, and he came up with this, the importance of opposites, bringing opposites together in God, being a quite religious today. So I think that's really interesting, and I just show how Hegel is also doing this rule of three thing. Let's look at how. Well, let's look at some of the theme. No, let's look at the three first of how it works in this story. So first of all, we have the boy. Now the three is embedded within, it's in the middle. Really, we have a prologue bit, and we have a much shorter epilogue bit. But the story is, so the boy himself represents pure compassion. As children, we've talked in previous episodes about the Victorian cult of the child, how the Victorians developed this idea of the sacredness of childhood, whereby the child is innocent. And pure comes into the world innocent. And purum now, of course, this is talking about Christian doctrine. This is contrary to the doctrine of original sin, which I've always found a very unpleasant doctrine, to be honest, you puts. Me off Christianity, that original sin, I can understand where it comes from, but I don't like it. So maybe I'm Victorian, I'm so Roland, is this, so what? Is that purity? The purity is love, is compassion. This is relevant to what I'm going to say later. So Roland is a pure, compassionate being. He feels so deeply. That his care for this poor soul is this killing him, you know? He, that is the cost of carrying the cost of. Price of love is suffering, is grief. That is true, the price of love is grief, and, but it's probably a price worth paying, yeah, anyway, so we have Roland as the, avatar of compassion. It's very Christ-like, very Victorian, a certain brand of Christianity that, emphasizes not the law, not doing good deeds, or not being kind to the poor. Except relatively with this, there is a bearing on it, isn't there? But the purity of compassion, Colonel Mortimer, is his every. Man, he starts like us moderns, and the Victorians were moderns where. He's living in a skeptical material world. Remember, the late 19th century was the high point of materialism, really, and probably it's diminished a little since then. So, the cult of materialism, like all of this, is just bits and bobs. It's billiard balls knocking against each other. It means nothing. Love is nothing. It's just about getting ahead, making money, and the devil take the hindmost. So he is that, but he's not quite that. He is every man. We believe that. But we also have a bit of this compassionist as well, which we inherit from our lives, you know, from our culture, from our parents, whatever. Some people aren't fortunate enough to inherit that compassion, but most of us have that, and we're a mix of rationalism. So do we believe in the supernatural world? Well, you know, he doesn't, of course, as modern people. We don't believe in things like that. Ghost, of course, we don't, but we maybe do a bit as well. So we have this cognitive dissonance. As they talk about, we can hold two contradictory beliefs in our head at the same time without any real problem. We just keep them somewhere separate. We believe both of them a bit now, but he is a materialist on it now. So the first time he goes, it's interesting. Bagley's roll Bagley is the simple son of the soil, son of toil. And I think the middle-class Victorians would see the working class as almost like Voltaire's noble savage, that although they were frightened of the working class, and they despised them in many ways, but they also one level in the same way of natives and savages, was the same ambivalence of opposites, what we were talking about before, and how you could keep the same two views in your head. There is the nobility and purity of the honest working man, but also his savagery. As well, he's unsophisticated, he's incapable of higher thought, and she as well. But, you know, but so Bagley in some sense, I think, represents, and I'm not quite sure how that works, maybe you can see that. So it fails, doesn't it? Number one, it fails, but it moves him from a position of skepticism to seeing. It puts him in a dilemma. He sees why his son is suffering. He is pointless. How does he bring this about? It's very much like us in the world. We may see a problem. How do we fix it? And we're in a dilemma. We really want to fix it. This is good writing, and he's really, really in a dilemma. And then we have Dr. Simpson now. The boy comments on the Simpson about he's only a doctor, and so the doctor. Forgive me, any doctors who are listening, because I know lots about doctors and lots of doctors, and I know many. Doctors are lovely, caring people, I would say the majority, But anyway, in this story, he is the scientist. Isn't he? And Simpson has no character arc. He almost gets budged. He sees these things, but I think Oliphant's saying this class of person, these like Richard Dawkins of this dyed in the wool. Materialist, it doesn't matter what experience he has, he's going to return back to his core beliefs. It's like he's not going to give away on his core beliefs. So he's almost pushed to the by what he sees. It's like Galileo isn't. It whereby they say Galileo, there are no moons around Jupiter, and he says, look in the telescope. And they go, no, I don't need to look in the telescope. I know there are. And that is the mark of the fanatic, and there are so many of those people, they know the truth. And they're not going to listen to any evidence because the truth is the truth. They already know it. They don't need to burden their mind with facts. They already know what is true, and Simpson is that, so he doesn't come out particularly well in this, I don't think. And then we have D.R. Monreef, and D.R. Monreef is a doubling almost of young Roland in age. And of course the Victorians had this idea of the wisdom of age, as well I think perhaps we still do. Children are innocent and pure, but almost an older person, a wise older person has had all the crap burned off them. That's a horrific metaphor. But all that stuff's riddled out of them, and they become luminescent. They become pollucid, they're clear, and then love can come to the original love, which is so contrary to the idea of original sin. There is this belief among some schools that we are pure creatures, and that purity is seen both in early childhood before the world has poisoned us, and towards death when we're slowing off the poison of the world. So Monreef, in a sense, is a doubling of the young Roland, the old man, and the young Way are both compassionate above anything else now. And of course we have the Colonel's character going through this, and he becomes that you far more compassionate man toward the end of it, and far more open. So what is the key? There are issues, the key themes, the weight of parental responsibility, the child's innocence as a conduit. We've talked about that reason versus the unseen. Okay, this is to say that the world is knocking at our door. Going, I am not contained in materialism. I am not just the sum of your scientific models. I am wild and dangerous and unknown and unpredictable. It's God knocking on your door. It is the unknown. It is the unknowable more than that, and it's making itself known. And if you try and capture in nets made of reason, they will fail because it cannot be contained. Somewhere else that God is not an object in his or her or its creation. It cannot be, because if it becomes an object, it has qualities, and a God has no qualities. God is everything and nothing. This is why opposites can be merged in God, because, anyway, again, this is really complex stuff, but I'm sure you're with me. So anyway, what the story is saying is the most important thing is not understanding. It is love, the most important thing, which is shown by both the boy and the old man, is love. They don't have to understand. And what she's saying in the story is understanding the ins and outs and how it's done, and the tricks of the trade are not the most important thing. The most important thing is compassion, and that is a certain view. I'm going to come back to that. Before I finish, which isn't going to be very long now, I want to say something about two other aspects of the story, which I'm just going to touch upon, and one is this idea of earth fast. So when I looked up earth fast, it turns out that what I thought was a widely understood term isn't so earth-fast. There was a book written called Earth-Fast, published in 1966 by a guy called Maine, which I loved. It's about Richmond Castle and a ghost underneath it that's from the 18th century. It's a great book. Some people know it because they've quoted it back to me, but it is a great book, and this is the idea. An earth-fast ghost to me is one that is tied to a place, usually in the theory would be that. And this is like a sort of a case scientific theory of what ghosts are, and I'm not saying they are, but it certainly exists that one of the roles of ghost is to be tied to a place. One of the things that ghosts do is to be tied to somewhere because of great unresolved emotion, because of their confused that the emotion ties them to the earth. And I think that's what we see in D.R. Monry says that it appears that what the ghost is an errol prodigal son who's gone away and ruined his life and comes back in his ruin to his mother at the door asking to be let. But the mother, I think the mother's died. Hasn't she, of a broken heart? Probably, and so because he doesn't understand that his mother's dead, and what D.R. Mree, as he prays that great providence that God will enlighten this poor ghost so that he can move on, and that does appear to happen through the agency of love of Roland of Mortimer, Colonel Mortimer, and of Dr. Monreef, of their compassion for this ghost. It acts as a conduit whereby forgiveness, I suppose, is given to the poor ghost who's sinned, if you want to use that term, by messing his life up, and so that kind of ghost that's stuck somewhere. I always thought it was an earth fast, and that's one of the roles of ghosts. The other thing that they touch upon, of course, is stone tape theory. And before there was such a thing as stone tape theory, this is 1881. Isn't it so, the idea of stone tape theory? So you may know stone tape theory come up with by Nigel Neal, who wrote BBC to BBC play 1972 called The Stone Tape. And the idea is that great emotion is captured if an event with great emotions, such as a murder or this kind of thing, is somehow stored in the stones themselves. And this idea was come up with by a guy called Thomas Charles Lethbridge in the 1960s, but it's been a common trope for much longer, because this is what we see. Cause Colonel Moncrief, not God, Colonel Mortimer, talks about how it's the same thing repeated, as if it's a role it has to play, and that seems to me to prefigure stone tape theory. So earth-fast and stone tape theory, I thought they were both evident or appeared in this story, and I wanted to say them. I wanted to talk about broad church theology. Just to finish off, I talked a bit about the Etta Gallup, how the Anglican Church evolved after splitting from Rome. Under Henry VIII and in the 19th century, there was a development called the Broad Church, which was a mediating position between the high church emphasis on sacramental tradition, which is the CA Anglo-Catholic, the Catholic theme within Anglicanism, and the evangelical focus on personal conversion and biblical literalism, because I suppose the two keystones of evangelical Christianity are personal experience of God and almost like a mystical thing, and the authority of Scripture and the literalism of Scripture, that what is written in the Bible is literally true. Okay, so the broad church, and that's a big tension, was a big tension within the Anglican Church. Those two wings did not and do not still totally rumble along happily together. So the broad church and the thinkers such as F.D. Morris, Charles Kingsley wrote The Water Babies, and later Benjamin Jowett, and they talk about a middle ground in there. Christianity is grounded in moral action, intellectual engagement, and in this point here, an openness to mystery that faith should evolve alongside human understanding, valuing ethical conduct and spiritual sincerity over above it. Adherence to doctrinal orthodoxy or biblical literalism. So it's sitting in the middle, and it is broad church. Theology did not want to impose narrow definitions on the divine and it insisted that Christian love, charity, and compassion remains central where your theological stuff is unclear and think this is a broad church story in that it contains the two themes abroad. Church theology, which would have been very current at Margaret Oliphant's during her life, and one. Is the primacy of compassion, love, and charity number one? I don't mean charity. Giving money to people in the street, what I mean is Akita's, and also the openness to mystery, being able to say you know that the divine and the ways of the divine are mysterious to us. We cannot know them, and being open to that and being able to sit with that mystery, and so I think it deserves this story, The Open Door by Margaret Oliphant. I think it deserves its place as a classic of the Victorian ghost story because it says so much more. It's not a psychological story in the way that other near contemporary turning of the screw by. Henry James which is also a great ghost story, or even Oliver Onions, which is again a psychological ghost story. I think this is using the ghost story as a vehicle to put forward, not in preaching terms as a parable, but the importance of the values of her theology, that is openness to mystery and to the primacy of compassion over reason, over human literalism, and reason. I've egged that a bit much, but you get me. I think that's what this story is about. I think it's a great story, and deserves its place. I hope you enjoyed it. And there was lots to say about this. There always is. I'm really pleased that people are liking these analyses because I love doing them, and my coach says I should just do analyses of stories, but I think that we'll be drifting away from what I do, which is the story is the main thing, and the analysis is hopefully a helpful but secondary thing. Anyway, hope you're well, peace and love. Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back. Isn't that so? You try to get into the lock drawer today, didn't you? How do the dead come back, mother? What's the secret of that?